Okay, Baruch Shechianu v'Kiyamanu v'Giyanu Lazman Hazeh. The start of a new Masechta, Baruch Hashem, a Masechta which is off the beaten track, and will challenge us a little bit. It's not what you learned in seventh grade. So we have three special sponsors for this new Masechta, as we're sponsored by Mark Frankel for the safety, security, and success of the soldiers of IDF. We should add that they're calling up many reservists who are older and are out of it, and they need a special tefillah for their safety. It's sponsored by Yisrael Fisher, Le'ili Nishmas Rab Avram ben Yosef Gross. Shama should have an aliyah. He should be a Meltz Yosher. Sponsored by Dr. Block, Le'ili Nishmas, his uncle, Uncle Morris, who really was like a father to him in Yiddishkeit. Mordechai ben Yisrael, his neshama should have an aliyah. Okay, you know what? Let's schmooze a little bit before we start. We know that if a person does one of the 36 sins that carry a penalty of chorus, if he does it b'shogeg, if he does it unwittingly, he brings a chatas. In Talmudic time, if let's say someone forgot it was Shabbos and opened the light. Now, I'm not talking about if he opened the light by reflex without thinking anything. I'm talking about he forgot it was Shabbos and he opened the light. So he did an Isser Koris b'shogeg. So he would bring a chatas. Now our Masechta, which is called Horayos, which means the decisions of the court, our Mishnah talks about a very rare carbon. The rare carbon is in the event one of the 36 Isur Karas is chelev, the forbidden fat is an Isur Karas. Now, let's say Bezdin paskind that a certain creature is not a behemoth, not a domestic animal, and therefore its chelev is permitted. And everybody goes out and says, wow, this stuff is delicious. Bezdin said it's permitted. And they have barbecues. And then Bezdin says we made a mistake. It really is a domestic animal, and it's an Isur Karas. So if the majority of Klal Yisrael sinned because of this erroneous psak of Bezdin, so Bezdin brings a par helim davar shel tzibur, the very rare carbon, a bull, for helim davar shel tzibur, because the tzibur was unaware and they did an aveira because of their psak. Now, there are tangential questions. If, let's say, Bezdin paskind that's opening the light using a certain delayed switch is permitted. And And Mark opened the light. And then he found out that Bezdin made a mistake. So Mark did Chilul Shabbos, but he relied on Bezdin. Now Bezdin doesn't bring a pile and Davashil Tzipah because it wasn't the majority of Klal Yisrael, it was just Mark. But Mark doesn't bring a Chattis. Why? Because Mark didn't make a mistake on his own, he relied on Bezdin. So Mark doesn't bring a Chattis. But what about the following case? Take a great sage, a great sage, like Shalom Fogel, sitting there in a room full of Svarim, and Shalom knows that Bezdin made a mistake. He knows. But he thinks anyway it's a mitzvah lishmaya divrei chachamim. You're supposed to listen to the high court. So he opens the light to learn, even though he knows really it's no good. But he listens to the chachamim. In such a case, this is a rare case, Shalom would bring a Chattis. You see how very delicate this distinction is? Since Shalom knew it was wrong, so you'll say if Shalom knew it was wrong, he's amazed. And if he's amazed, he doesn't bring a carbon. But he made a mistake, a different mistake. He thought he was supposed to listen to the sages. In such a case, he does bring a carbon Chattis. Mark, who thought it was permitted, he doesn't bring a Chattis. He relied on Bezdin. Shalom knew that Bezdin was making a mistake. So he didn't rely on Bezdin, but he thought it was a mitzvah l'shmaya divrei chacham. That's a different thing. He has to bring a Chattis. So that's going to be the start off of this Masechta.
Well, one thing you said, there were 39 forms of work. I thought you said 36 at the beginning.
There's 39 forms of work forbidden on Shabbos. There's 36 Isurei Karis in the Torah. You're mixing two different things.
Thank you for clarifying.
We welcome in Saba, Yaakov Warman, Irving Fishbaum, Shimon Klein, Shelley Zeitlin, Mel Zachter, Itchy, Baruch Ian, Marshall Castle, Mark Frankel, Shalom Fogel, Ruvain Pollack, Barry Cement, Rebecca Yaffe, Yisrael Fisher, Menachem Umansky, Yitzi Fuchs, Dr. Block, Rabbi Kranz, Danny Vogel, Nachman Chapler, Moshe Lehman, Yitzi Muller, Avram Rezepkowitz, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberger, Abe Arbach, David Helfgott, and Gedalia Engel just getting in under the wire. He missed Akdama, but Gedalia, this is not his first rodeo in Masechtas Horayos, so maybe he could do without the Akdama. But
Can I ask a little clarification on the third example?
yes,
He knew that the Beis Din was wrong,
correct.
but there is the mitzvah to follow what the Beis Din says. How do you decide on those two?
The answer is that his boich didn't need the chaylev. So over there, since he knew that it was wrong, it wasn't a mitzvah to eat the chaylev.
Have any obligation to go tell them?
What?
Does he have an obligation to
Well, that's not our subject. Yes, he should discuss it with the Beis Din. But this was the emes of boich svara. This is a boich svara. Shalom used the svara with his boich. But anyway, the must have been a very good piece of chaylev. So now, as I said, Baruch Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'gyanu lazman hazeh. Horu Bezdin, if Bezdin paskins lavar alachas mikol mitzvahs amurus b'Torah. They said that this switch you could turn on Shabbos. V'halach hayochid, and Mark goes, v'asa shoygeg al piyam, and he does it relying on them. So he was totally unaware because he thought it was permitted. Bein she'asu v'asa imam, whether Bezdin also did it and he followed them. Bein she'asu v'asa achreim, or Bezdin did it and he did it after them. Bein she'lo, so even if Bezdin didn't use the switch, v'asa, but he relying on their psak, Mark is a very good, has emunas chachamim, potter. Why? Because he relied on Bezdin. Well, it wasn't his mistake. He relied on Bezdin, and therefore he's potter from bringing a chatas. However, Hoyra Bezdin paskin that the switch is permitted. V'yada echad mehem shito, and Shalom, being an eminent member of the court, knew that they were making an error. Oy Talmud, or Shalom is a disciple, but V'roi l'hoira, but he is also worthy to render psak, yes, smicha, but v'holach v'os al pien, he followed their decision, because he thought he made a different mistake. He thought it was a mitzvah l'shmaya l'divrei chachamim. Bein she'asu v'asa imam, whether they used the switch and he did it with them. Bein she'asu v'asa achreim, he did it after them. Bein she'lo yasa, they didn't do it v'asa. Harizeh chayiv, Shalom is chayiv to bring a chatas. Why? He knew it was wrong, and therefore mipnei she'lo tola bebezdin. He didn't do it because Bezdin said it was right. In other words, that wasn't to him the reason why he did it. He made a different mistake, and that is he thought he should follow the words of the Chacham. But he knew it was wrong. In such a case, he didn't depend on Bezdin. Zaklal, this is the general principle, if he was relying on his own thoughts, chay. But if he was totally relying on Bezdin, potter. Now, remember now we're going to switch back to the din that if Bezdin rules that the chaylev is permitted, and a majority of Klal Yisrael follows their erroneous decision, Bezdin has to bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. It's nice to have Naftali Jablin and Eddie Chazan. We already have Dr. Block joined us, one of our sponsors, Dr. Guy. Nice to have already 32 Zoomers for the new Masechta, and I neglected to welcome in all the wonderful people that are here with us in the shul, Berish Kesem, and it's good to have Chaim Kramer back in person, Michal Avram Chavin, Ruvain Shanet.
Rabbi Weiss, I don't understand that. In the case where he knew that that's was wrong, and he did it anyway, right? And so he has to bring the chadras, correct?
Correct.
Well, if he knows it's wrong to do, why is he doing it?
Because, okay. What part of mitzvah l'shmaya divrei chacham did you not understand?
But the Bezdin didn't say eat the chayla.
Okay, he thought that he's setting an example to listen to the sages. Now, so now, going back again to the case of the Parahelim Davar Shel Tzibur, where the majority of the Tzibur ate the Chaylev because of an erroneous psak of Bezdin. When is it considered a psak of Bezdin? So this is another delicate point. Amar Shmuel la'olam ein Bezdin chayavin. Bezdin is not chayiv to bring the Parahelim Davar Shel Tzibur ad sheyomer lehem mutarin atem, until they announce you are permitted to have the fat. Rav Dimi min Arda says it has to be more explicit. Somebody has to ask a shaila, can I eat the fat? And Bezdin has to answer a direct question. Rav Dimi min Ardama at sheyomer lehem mutarin atem lasais. It has to be not just that Bezdin issued a theoretical ruling. It has to be an answer to a direct question of practical halacha. My timer. Lefi shaloi nigmara hara, it's not considered to be a conclusive psak until the Bezdin says you are allowed to do this. Amar Abaya afa nami nami tanina. We learned, like the subtle insistence of Rav Dimi min Arda, tanin afa na nami tanina. This is about the rebellious sage. The Torah says that if a sage rebels against the court, the high court, that sage is put to death. So the Gemara tells us, Tanina Chazal Irai, if this Zakein Mamre, he's called, a rebellious sage, if this Zakein Mamre, Bezdin made a decision, he disagreed with the decision. Chazal Irai, he's a big Rosh Hashiva in his city. Chazal Irai, Shana V'limeid Kederach Limeid, if he learned and taught like his opinion against the high court, he's still patur. He doesn't get the death sentence. Hora lasais, but if he issues a psak to do against the high court, only then is he chai. So there's a difference between saying it's permitted or rendering a psak that it's permitted. Amar Rav Abba afanan nami tanina. We learned also in another place the same idea. Hora la bezdin linase. A woman, her husband went missing, and Bezdin paskined that she could remarry. What she did, however, is she had an affair. She didn't go to a chuppah. She had a one-night stand. Now she said, Bezdin paskin, I'm allowed to marry, so that means my husband is dead. So okay, so she had a one-night stand. The holcha the kilkala. Then it turns out that her husband is alive. In such a case, chayeves bekorban, she has to bring a korban chatas because she did an iser of Misa's Bezdin, because her husband was really alive. She did it unwittingly. But she can't say like Mark that I relied on the court, because the court didn't say that she could have a fling. They just said that she can marry. Shelo yitiru la el linase. But okay, that's interesting halacha. But what we're zooming in on is the fact that it's only when Horula Bezdin, when Bezdin rendered the decision, Amravina, Afana Nami Tanina. We learned also in the Mishnah, Hora Bezdin Lavar Alachas Mikol Mitzvahs Amuas B'Taira. When is there going to be a Parahelim Davar Shel Tzibur? When Bezdin issued a definitive ruling, you are allowed to do this about Shabbos, about fat, about blood. And Sulay Midei. There's nothing more to talk about this. Ikidam, right? There's a different version. Get a little review over here. Ikadam, right? And remember, Rabbi Isaac, the guy says that every word is a mitzvah saseh, and the most chashuv mitzvah saseh, Talmud Torah keneged kulam, it equals to all other mitzvahs. Here, a guy like Marshall is saying, well, I could be painting the shul right now, and I could be crossing an old lady across the street, and I could be preparing the seats for the shul, and I could be cooking for the shul's kiddush, but my learning is equal to all those activities. Amazing thing. So we have in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah dibar tabam lasais nachas ruach liyitzreinu. So ikadam, right? Amar Shmuel, ein bezdin chayovim. Bezdin is not chayiv ad sheyoimru lehem mutarim atem lasais. That you are permitted to do this. In other words, they asked him, could we use this delayed switch on Shabbos? And they said, you're allowed to use it. Rav Dimi min Ardam, Rav Dimi says it doesn't have to be so definitive. It could even be if they give a theoretical decision. Afilu mutarim atem, even if they just say this is permitted, nigmar ayra. Amar Abayis, so Abayis says, no, that's not enough. V'oloi tananachi. It says, chazu le'irai, if the rebellious sage returns to his city in Shnipashak. V'shanoi limit kedar shalimit. And he continued learning and teaching like his rebellious view. Potter, he doesn't get to that sentence. If he renders a decision to somebody, only then he's chayiv. Amar Rababa further pursues this and says, well, it's not enough a theoretical decision. If Bezdin issued a ruling for her to marry, her husband, they said, is dead, she could remarry, but but she had a fling, and then her husband came back alive, chayeves bekarben, because she didn't rely on the ruling of Bezdin. They only permitted her to marry, not to have a fling. Ravina, furthermore, the third proof, it doesn't say a theoretical decision is enough. It says definitively, Horu Bezdin laver lachas mikol mitzvah samus b'tayra. If Bezdin renders a decision that you could eat this chaylev, and it's not the forbidden chaylev, only then, not if they just say a theoretical ruling, but if they pass into somebody who asked the shayla, and sulay midei, there isn't more to discuss. So now, the Gemara is, this is Shas. Every word counts. We said the case of Mark. Mark is a very good sinner. So Mark, he heard Bezdin paskin that you could use this switch it on Shabbos. So the halach hayachid v'asa shoygeg al piyah. And Mark did it in error because he was relying on them. So if you had your eagle eye activated, you would see that the word shogag is really superfluous. It should just say Mark did what they said. What do you mean Mark did in error what they said? It should just say that Mark found, they said that you could eat this chaylev, so Mark ate the chaylev. Why does it say the word shayek? That's a great diet. Right? So halach yachid v'asa shayek al piyam v'nisnei, let it just say v'asa al piyam. He did it according to what they want. Shoygeg lamali. Why does it say that he did it in error? So it's such a good question. So Rava says, listen to what the Gemara says now. Let's say that Bezdin Paskin, that this chaylev is permitted. Mark thought it was meal mart steak. And that's why he ate it. And it turned out to be chaylev. Is he chayav achatas? He didn't eat it because he relied on the court. He ate it because he thought it was meal mart. But the court paskin that the chaylev was permitted. The plot thickens. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava shaygeg la'asiyei hayre bezdin shechaylev mutter. Bezdin paskin that this chaylev was mutter. However, Mark didn't eat it because of that. V'nischalef loy chaylev b'shumen v'achloi. He ate it because he thought it was meal mart steak. Even so, Potter, why? Because al PM implies al PM mamish. Al PM implies that he relied on their psak. The word shoygeg comes to include even this case. The ikidamre, there's another version. Amar Rava shoygeg al PM hu departed. It's only if he made an error because he relied on their psak. If he switched it and ate the chaylev because he thought it was meal mart, so either Rava holds that it's certainly no chatas, or either Rava says that there is a chatas because he didn't rely on them. He made a switch. Now the Gemara tells us a third thing. Milsa the pshita leila Rava, one way or the other, kamabay leila Rami bar Chama, is a question to Rami bar Chama. The boy Rami bar Chama, hayre bezdin shechelav mutter. If Bezdin said that this chelav is mutter, v'neschalef loy b'shumen, and Mark ate it because he thought it was meal mart, v'achlo mao. So Rami bar Chama had a question about it. So now Rava proves it, and if you're just joining us, or you lost the place, with 2 lines into the wide lines, and Rabbi said, you'll excuse me, I'm going a little slower than I usually would, because it's a little bit unusual terrain. This won't last for a long while, but I want to take it easy. I don't want somebody to say, I'm not going to see this in 7.5 years, and my head is swimming. So I don't want you to be swimming in the fat, if you know what I mean. Anyway, Mark is doing all these isurim. We might as well, benefit.
I know where you're going, buddy.
Yes, you know it well, Marshall.
He's coming to Chicago.
Amar Rava, Tajma, Holach Yochid v'Asa Shoygeg al PM. If Mark went and did it in error because of their psak, Shoygeg al PM lamali. Why does it have to say Shoygeg al PM? It should just say al PM. Lav la'asiyeh, isn't it coming to include also a case where he just made an error? Horu bezdin shechelav mutav v'nislal chalf like chelav b'shuman, and he confused the chelav for the shuman v'achlu, and therefore pater. Says the Gemara, no, maybe we don't look at it that way. Maybe we look at it just the opposite. The Mishnah is insisting Dilma shogeg al piemu de pater. It's only if he made an error because he relied on what they said. But if he just made a mistake because he thought it was meal mart, chai. Ikidamre. Now those that know, when there's so many ikidamres, this is a sign that there could be a lot of questions in the nuskos of the Gemara. we're going to have an example tonight that the Gemara is really only understandable when we actually change the girsa in the Gemara. So that's one of the challenges of this Masechta. Danny, who knows from learning Yerushalmi, knows that when you learn Yerushalmi, you have a lot of different girsois. In this Masechta, we have a lot of different girsois. Ikad Amrei, Amarava, Tajma, Holach Yochid v'Oser Shoygeg al Piem. Mark goes and does it in error because of what they said. My love, Shoygeg al Piem hu departed. It's only because he did it because he relied that they said that the delay switch is permitted, or this chaylev is permitted. Aval nischal v'lo chaylev b'shumin, even though they rendered a psak, but he ate it not because of their psak, but because he mistook chaylev for mealmat steak v'achlu chayev. Says the Gemara, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it says the extra word shogeg to tell me both cases. Dilma oy shogeg, either if he made an error because he mistook it for mealmat, oy al pm, or because he relied on what they said. Either case, he's not going to bring a chatas. Says the Gemara, well, actually, this is a machlokes. This is beplukta. It's interesting. This is already a machlokes between Amoraim, between different Amorim. Hoyre Bezdin shechelev mutter. If Bezdin said that this species of chelev is permitted, but Mark ate it because he made a mistake. V'neschalav loy chelev b'shumen ba'achloi. Rav Amar Potter. Rav says that since there was already a psak from Bezdin that this chelev is permitted, so therefore Mark doesn't bring a chatas. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayim, and Rabbi Yochanan says since Mark didn't rely on the court, he's chayim. Meisvei, it says in the pasuk, "May am ha'oretz ba'asosa." If one of the people of the land did this mistake, now may am ha'oretz implies only a certain amount of people, but not all the people. Whenever it says mem, it means from, but not all. So we infer a limitation that who brings a chatas? Only a regular yid, a garden variety yid, like Ruvain Palak. But a mummer, I'm not going to tell you who the mummer is, who the renegade is. You'll use your healthy imagination. You'll use your healthy imagination. So I could see Yitzi hit it on the head. And anyway, it says, Me'am ha'aretz prat l'mummer. A renegade Jew would not bring a chatas. Reb Shimon, Yaisiam Rishim Reb Shimon, Einay Tzarek, you don't need the mem. Hari hu aimer asher lo yisasena b'shagei v'oshem. If he does something which he shouldn't have done unwittingly and he's guilty, oy hoida elav chatasa, when it becomes known to him his sin. That implies when he did it, it wasn't known to him, which implies that if it would have been known to him, he wouldn't have done it. That excludes somebody like Marshall who would have done it even if he knew about it. So that already excludes a mummer. Did I say Marshall? Oh, that was a slip. That was a slip. I slipped. You know, I meant he who must not be named. Oh, that sounds like Harry Potter. But he who must not be named. So, Hashav mi yedi asai. Only somebody who would have refrained, if he knew about it, maybe carbon al shigigasai. Lo yishav mi yedi asai. But if he wouldn't refrain, then ain't a maybe carbon al shigigasai. So now the Gemara asks a very clever question. So you wanted to say, Rabbi Yochanan, that if Mark ate the chaylev because it got mixed up, he thought it was meal mart, he's chayiv, but even if he would have known it was chaylev, he wouldn't have refrained because Bezdin paskin it's mutter. So it's not a case of shav miyadiyasei. What a brilliant question. He wouldn't have refrained if he knew it was chaylev, because even if he found out that it wasn't meal mart, he would have still eaten it because Bezdin paskin that the chaylev is mutter. What a good kasha. Says the Gemara, no. Since eventually Bezdin realized their mistake, and when Bezdin realizes its mistake, then Mark would not eat it. That's not considered Eina Shav Midiyaseh. Amar Papa Kasavar Rabbi Yochanan came on the Chimisyadulu Bezdin. When Bezdin finds out that they were mistaken and this is really chaylev, Hadrei Behu Bezdin will retract their decision. And then Behu Nami Hadr Bey, Mark would also retract. That is considered Shav Miyadiyaseh Karina Bey, and therefore V'chayim. Now, Rav said that if Mark ate it because he thought it was meal mart, he's patur from bringing a chatas. Right? Because Bezdin said, anyway, this chaylev is permitted. But now let's say it wasn't the majority of Klal Yisrael unless we count Mark. If we count Mark, that's the majority of Klal Yisrael. Will Bezdin bring a par helam davashel tzibur? Or do we say Mark can't count because he ate it because he mistook it for meal mart? So he can't be counted as part of the majority of Klal Yisrael. And indeed, that's what the Gemara says. Amar Rava Moida Rav She'ena Mashlim L'Rayv Tzibur. He can't be counted to make it the majority of the tzibur, my timer, because Amar Kra, the pasuk says Bishkaga, they all have to eat it because of the same mistake. Actually, Kulon Bishkaga Achas. Okay. Well, I know it's late, and I know you probably feel that I'm creeping, but I want to give you all a mazel tov that you finished one amid of this Masechta. This Masechta, by the way, is only 12 and a half blat, so, we're way on the way to finishing the Masechta already, but it is unusual Gemara, so you'll have to forgive me that at least in the start, I'm taking it slow, that the Olam shouldn't feel that they're missing out. Now, you wanted to ask something quick?
It was answered.
It was answered? Good. Now, Bein sha'asu v'asa imahen. We said that he's potter, Mark, when he does it because he's relying on them, he's potter whether they did it and he did it with them, or they did it and did it after them, or if they didn't do it at all and he did it. So the Gemara says, Lama le lamisne kol hani. Why do we have to teach all these three levels? Bishlam Reisha, it's saying a chiddush that Mark is potter whether he did it at the same time as the court, even if he did it only after the court, or even if the court didn't do it. So it's building up to a climax. That's loy zuavzu kitani. Not only this, but this. Not only this, but this. It's building up to a climax. That's Mishnaic style. Ela Seifa de l'chiyuva, but in the Seifa, where we said that if Shalom knew that it was forbidden, not only is he chayiv if he did it with them, not only is he chayiv if he did it after them, not only is he chayiv if he did it alone, there to the contrary. Each case, subsequent case, is less of a chiddush. Says the Gemara, it should have said it the other way around. So the Gemara says there's another stylistic way of the Mishnah, and that's Zuvein Tzarech Loimer Zu Katan. Sometimes it says the biggest Kiddush first, and then it says the lesser Kiddush and the lesser Kiddush. Now, V'yoda echad mehem shito. And Shalom was a member of the High Court, and he knew they were making a mistake. He knew that such a delayed switch is not permitted. Oy Talmud v'roi lo yira, or he was a disciple worthy to issue psak. Says the Gemara, Tarte lamali, what do we need both cases for? Amarava Itzra, we need both cases. So kedai techamina, hani mili gamir v'saver. If he's a member of the court, he's learned and he has logic. Aval gamir v'loy saver, but if he's learned and he doesn't have logic, loy. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. If he's a Talmud Aroy Loy Ra, if he's worthy of psak, then he definitely does. He definitely can reason. Says the Gemara, Amalei Abaya Loy Ra. If you're saying that he's a Talmud that's Roy Loy Ra, Gama v'Saver Mashma. So he says, you're right. We know that we sometimes learn out another case from a yiter lashon, from something superfluous in the Mishnah. Amalei ana hachi kamina. Imahi, if it was only the fact that it says a member of the Sanhedrin, havamina ani mili gamer v'saver. Aval gamer v'loy saver, but if he had knowledge, but he didn't know how to reason, loy. There I might say we view him as taka a shoygeg, and he doesn't have to bring the carbon because he really relied on Bezdin. Tana roy loy ra, which is superfluous, or Mishnah Yisera, from that superfluous comment, afilu gamer v'loy saver, whether he was learned but he didn't reason, or saver v'loy gamer, or he knew how to reason but he doesn't have a wide breadth of knowledge. Still, if he knew that it was really forbidden, and he only did it because of mitzvah l'shmaya divrei chachamim, he's going to be chayiv to bring a chatas. Roy loy ra, kigayin man, like who? Amarava kigayin Shimon ben Azai v'Shimon ben Zayma. You have to know that they died young. They never got smicha, and that's why they were only known as Ben Zayma and Ben Azai, not Rav, because they never got smicha. Amalei Abaya, ki hai gavna mezidu. People like Shimon ben Azai and Shimon ben Zayma, they know that it's wrong. If they did it anyway, why should they be chayiv a carbon? That's mezid. That's willful. You don't bring a carbon for willful. Says the Gemara, l'tamech, according to you, haditanya, ba'asoso achas. When you do one of them, yochid ha'oisa mipi atzmai chayiv. A yochid that does it on his own is chayiv, but ras bezdin potter. But the ra bezdin is potter. Ketzad. Hayru bezdin shechelev mutter. If bezdin paskin that this species of chelev is mutter. V'noida le'echad me'em shito. And it was known to one of the members of the court that they made a mistake. Oy Talmud Yoshev Lefneim or V'roi Loi Ra. We know that in front of the court there was a bullpen where if one of the members got sick or had to leave, they elevated somebody from the bullpen, and that Talmud knew it was a mistake of the court. K'gayin Shimon ben Azai, Yochel Yehi Potter, I might think that he's Potter from bringing a chatas. Talmud Leimer ba'asoisa achas, Yochid oisa piatzmai chayiv. If the Yochid did it on his own, he's chayiv. By Ras Bezdin Potter. Why? why don't you say he's amazed? So here the Gemara spells it out like we learned. Ella heichi mishkachasla. What's the case? Kigain the yada the aser, where he knew that it was aser, but v'katoi b'mitzvah l'shmaya devrei chacham. So the didi nami that I say like Shim ben Azai and Shim ben Zayna, it means the tova mitzvah l'shmaya devrei chacham. That was the mistake. Zaklal. Now, whenever it says zaklal, it's coming to include something. Zaklal atoila ba'atzmai chayiv. If he does it because he thought it was a mitzvah to listen to the chacham, he's chayiv. Le'asuyei mai. Le'asuyei mevayet b'hoira. Here you have a person who usually rebels against the views of the tzibur. He doesn't listen to the tzibur. He doesn't listen to the court. Here the court ruled it was permitted, but he did it. Now you can't say he did it because of the court, because he rebels against the view of the court. So then that means he did it because he thought it was mutter. In that case, he's chayiv echatas. It says, but if he's toila bebezdin, he's potter. What does that zaklal come to include? L'surye hora bezdin v'yadu sheto. Oh, here's an interesting case. I'm mistaking the guess over here. Oh, yeah. The suye, it comes to include, here it's an interesting case. Bezdin paskin that this chaylev is permitted. Berish always wanted to taste this chaylev. He's a curious guy. Bezdin paskin, it's permitted. He went and bought it. Bezdin reversed their decision. Berish didn't know about it. So he ate the chaylev. So there he's potter. Even though Bezdin already reversed their decision. But he didn't know it, and he ate it because of the decision of the court. Let's see it inside. L'suye hoyre Bezdin v'yoduv chito v'chazer behen. Bezdin issued a psak, and then Bezdin realized they made a mistake. They retracted. But Berish didn't know they retracted. So in that case, he's also potter. Says the Gemara, well, if you wait to learn further in this Masechta, you'll see that this case about Berish is taught beferish. Ha-behed yikedanila. Says the Gemara, you're right. Tani, here it's alluded to. V'hadam mefarish. And later on, it's going to explain it in detail. Now,
On that very first
now the plot thickens. You'll have to wait, Shelley. It's already 9:05, and the natives are getting restless. I know they're getting restless because they're so anxious for the Shkumash here. They can't wait. It's like, it's a very big problem. They just, someone like Marshall says, I just can't wait till the Shkumash here. Says the Gemara, I know my Chicagoans. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm a Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Zu divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Aval Chachamim Aimim, listen to the sheet of the Chacham. Bezdin paskins that this delayed switch on Shabbos is permitted. And Mark opens the light. The Chachamim hold that Mark is chayiv. The only time you're potter is if the majority of the tzibur does it. But if one guy does it, he's going to be chayiv echatas. It's a new opinion. Let's see it inside. Anaya Shita. Am Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol Zu Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Aval Chachamim, the sages say Yochid She'asa B'Raz Bezdin Chayiv. That if one individual does it relying on the court, he has to bring a chatas. It's only if the majority my Rabbi Yehuda. So first let's get Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Tanya, v'im nefesh achas techata b'shgoga ba'asosa. Now, we're going to see that this has three miyutim. Nefesh, achas, and ba'asosa. Right? That's three miyutim. Those three miyutim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, say you're chayiv v'chatas only if you did it because of your own mistake. But if you did it because of a decision of Bezdin, why do you need three miyutim? The three cases in the Mishnah. Whether they did it and you did it with them, they did it and you did it after them, or they didn't do it and you did it, then you're pater. Harayelu shloishim miyutim, because only if Mark made the mistake himself. But by Raz, Bezdin, pater. But if Mark did it only because it was issued a psak of Bezdin, it's pater. That, by the way, that's the simple pshat in Horayos. That if Mark did it because Bezdin said it's permitted, he's pater from a chatas. So Rabbi Yehuda is the normative halacha. What's the chachamim? My Rabbanan. Here the Gemara gets really, in Mesechtes Nedarim, the Gemara says, and I could only say this because the Gemara says it, the Gemara says, Lashon Nedarim Meshuna. The Lashon of Nedarim is different. Here we could really say, Lashon the Horayos Meshuna. The language is a little different. So the Gemara says, my Rabbanan, and I don't say this as any criticism, it's a different style. My Rabbanan, the Tanya, Adayin ani Aimer, I would think that miyat kol shechatu chayavim, that if the minority of the kol sinned, then, and here it's talking about where they sinned because of their own mistake. Bezdin didn't say anything. But I would say miyat kol shechatu chayavim, if a miyat, Mark and Marshall and Eddie and Barry, a cross-section of villains, right? So miyat kol, if a minority of the kol sinned chayavim, she'ein bezdin mevi'en al yidei par, because there's no power helam davar shel tzibur by a minority. But roiv kol shechatu, I might think even without a decision of bezdin, but the majority of Klal Yisrael made a mistake, so we should mark them on a curve, and Yehu Peturim. Why? Because in the case of Bezdin, then they bring a par. Shari Bezdin mevi'an al yidei par. Talmud Leimer me am ha'aretz. If it's from the am ha'aretz, afilu ruba, even if the majority of Klal Yisrael made a mistake, va'afilu kula, even if all of Klal Yisrael made a mistake. Now, the language over here is a little bit cryptic. But my, if it's talking about where they made a mistake, where Bezdin didn't render a decision the way I explained it, So what does that have to do with the parallel davar shel tzibur? Bezdin maya avidite. What? Well, we won't be going shalei baras bezdin, but bezdin maya avidite. What are you bringing in the parallel davar shel tzibur for? What does that have to do? Where 4 people made a mistake, or the majority of people made a mistake? It has nothing to do with bezdin. Bezdin mi ma'aser shalei ba'ira. Is there any param davar shel tzibur where bezdin wasn't involved? If bezdin wasn't involved, what are you bringing up the param davar shel tzibur? Ela b'hara. It must be talking about where bezdin did make a decision, and it's telling us that if bezdin made a decision, then even if the 4 cronies made a mistake, they don't bring a carbon. But for kiksiv me ama oretz, you quoted the pasuk of me ama oretz ba'asosa, which is talking about just the mistake of people without bezdin. B'shigis ma'aser dichsiv, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is forced to give the following interpretation. Now, I think it's noteworthy to look at, if you have an art scroll, I think it's noteworthy to look at footnote number 28, because it'll really make you feel more comfortable from how doichik this Gemara sounds. The explanation that follows, which is the source for Rabbi Yehuda's statement that the sages maintain that an individual who relies on a ruling of the court is liable to chatas, is admittedly quite forced. It's a quite forced explanation. But Rabbi Yehuda adopts it because he has just demonstrated any other explanation of the Bryce is untenable. That's what you hear might not sound very comfy. Ela lav hachikamer. Miat kol shechatu b'shigeres ma'isa. A miat of the kol, like Barry, Eddie, Marshall, and Mark. It's very hard for me to remember just these 4 names. Very, very hard. Very hard. So miat kol shechatu b'shigeres ma'isa chayovin. Why? Because in such a case, in a similar case, if Bezdin issues an erroneous decision, they won't bring a param davar shel tzibur for just 4 people. She'ein Bezdin mevi'in al yedem par b'hoira. Ha'hein chayovin. But they have to bring a carbon. Yachol roiv tzibur she'asu b'shigas ma'isa yehu p'turin. I might think, however, if the majority of Klal Yisrael made a mistake, they thought a delayed switch is permitted. Bezdin didn't say anything. But I might say that they should be putter anyway, since in an analogous case, Shari Bezdin mevi'an aleim par b'hira, because Bezdin brings in such a case a par b'hira. Ta'amalaimer, it says me'ama oretz, and me'ama oretz means even everybody, even majority of Klal Yisrael. Afilu rubai, if they all made a mistake, they bring a carbon. So Rav Papa says, but where do we see from here? we don't see from over here any, as we welcome in Daniel Rosenberg of our 30th Zoomer. Rav Papa says, where do we see from here our case? The case that's up for controversy is where Bezdin makes an erroneous decision that the delayed switch is mutter. And only Mark, Marshall, Eddie, and Barry use it. So he said that in such a case, the Chachamim hold that they're chayiv. The only time they're potter is if the majority of Klal Yisrael does the mistake. But where do you see that from this teaching? Amar Papa Memai, Dilma loyhein v'loy bezdin, that is the halacha. That if Mark, Barry, Eddie, and Marshall listen to the psak of bezdin, the erroneous psak of bezdin, they're not chayiv achatas because they relied on the court, and the court is not chayiv apaham davar shel tzibur because it wasn't rive of Klal Yisrael. How do you know that that's not the way it is? So says the Gemara, Ihachi, if so, my area the kamahader al ruba l'chiyuva. Why does the Gemara say that? Well, you see that. Why does the Gemara say that? How do we know that if the majority of Klal Yisrael sinned without the court, that they should be chayiv achatas? I don't understand. What's the difference if the majority sins without a court ruling or the minority sins without a court ruling? Why should it be any different? You know, they made a mistake. They had nothing to rely on. La michlal, it must be that the miyat b'hara kaimelu the mechayvu b'hara. Oh, it must be that the question over here is, it must be that a minority that does Mark, Marshall, Eddie, and Barry, if they relied on the court and they did it, they're still chayiv. And therefore, the Gemara says, well, if they're still chayiv, even though the court says that they are allowed to do it, and they relied on the court, and they're still chayiv, so maybe even if the majority relied on the court, they should also be chayiv. And therefore, that's the logic. V'nahada b'reisha al miyuta de mechayiv b'shigig es ma'isa. First, the Gemara reviews that if 4 people do it, relying on the court, they're still chayiv. So therefore, I'll say, so you see, even though they relied on the court, they're chayiv. So maybe they should be chayiv even if the majority relied on the court. V'lebesayf nehadar al ruba lechiyuva b'shigig es ma'isa. One second. Here. Right. Says the Gemara, if in the Hada Bereisha al Miyuta and the Mechayev b'Meshigas Maisa, if the ratio tells us that 4 people, if they did it with the psak of the court, are potter, then we wouldn't have to ask what would be if the majority did it with the psak of the court. If 4 people did it with the psak of the court, they're potter from achatis. So then surely if the majority did it with the psak of the court, they're potter. Elalav. Midoloi Mahader. Now here, this is the bad gears. Elalav Midamahader. If you look at the article in footnote 38, he brings down from the Chok Nosen that you have to change this to Midamahader. Otherwise, the Gemara makes no sense at all. Elalav Midabahader al Miyat de Mechayev b'Shigeyas Maisa. Since first we established that if Mark, Barry, Eddie, and Marshall, isn't that good that I always remember these four names? Right? If these four people did it, even with a psak of the court, they're chayiv. So therefore, the Gemara then wonders, what about if the majority did it in the psak of the court? And then it says that if the majority did it without the psak of the court, then they're going to be chayiv, but with the psak of the court, they're going to be potter. Shma mina miut ba'ora, if a minority does Barry, Marshall, Eddie, and Mark uses the delayed switch with the psak of the court that it's permitted, chayav and hang kizbo sira. They're chayav the normal carbon of a chattis, either a female sheep or a female goat. Vishaloi ba'ara, if they did it without a psak, v'shigis ma'isa, they're also chayav. So again, let me review this machlokes. The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is in the case where Mark, Marshall, Barry, and Eddie heard a psak from Bezdin that the delayed switch is permitted on Shabbos. And they did it. So Rabbi Yehuda says the way we understand it, that since they did it because of the Horah of the court, they will be exempt from achatas. It's the position of the Chachamim that the only time they get the exemption for listening to the court is there has to be two variables. Number one, Bezdin has to rule that it was permitted, and number two, the majority has to follow that psak. If only the four cronies follow the psak, there's still going to be chayiv achatas. Any questions on this? Okay, this was the language over here in the Gemara was very, very difficult, and we had to change the girsa. The Gemara is going to get easier. Don't be disheartened. This is not an easy bit of Gemara, and it's a little bit of a long daf, and also, but as I said, it's going to get easier. I want to now invite you to join us for the Chomishir.